Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sharpening Report. We have a very special guest, one that we haven't had on for a number of years. So please welcome back to the show, Gregory Reid, author of the book, Diary of a Devil Hunter, which will be the topic of today's show. Welcome back to the show, Greg. How are you doing?
Good, Josh. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to do it, and it has been a few years, but it's definitely about time that we start having you back on because this is a really important topic. And since you've been on last time, we've gotten a lot more subscribers and a lot of new people. So for those not familiar, could you give us a rundown of your testimony, how you came to know Jesus, and how that led to what you do today?
You bet. I was born and raised in Southern California. And as a child, unbeknownst to my parents, I was pulled into a very dark neighborhood group of adults and children who were involved in not just child abuse, child pornography, but also practice of ritual abuse, satanic, I guess is what we call it today, satanic ritual abuse. And I was one of their victims. And when I was 11, I was kind of put back in the mainstream. And they were, I guess, waiting for all that stuff to work at a point where they could bring me back in. And by the time I was 14, all of the things that had happened were starting to break down. And I became a hardcore alcoholic at 14. And I was deeply, deeply enmeshed in the occult. I was doing everything with black magic. I made some sort of little vow I wouldn't do that until I cursed somebody and whether it really had anything to do with it or not, that person died that night. And it scared me so bad. But I had nowhere to go because I'd been at church. I didn't know exactly. It didn't connect with me at all. I thought, Buddha, Jesus, whoever, it doesn't really make a difference. But at some point, somebody gave me a copy of The Cross and the Switchblade by David Wilkerson. And I read that book, and it just tore me up because it talked about David facing down Nicky Cruz, which is the most dangerous gang leader in New York, and telling him that, Jesus loves you, Nicky, and Nicky beat him up and said, "What do you think about that, preacher?" And David said, "Nicky, you can cut me up in 1,000 pieces, and every piece is going to scream out, Jesus loves you." When I read that, I took the book and I threw it against the wall. I was so angry. I said, "Why didn't anybody ever tell me this?" And there was this thought of maybe it's possible that there's somebody out there. And so I went home and I cried out to the Lord that night. The short version is, and I guess I can say like Paul, whether in the body or out, I don't know. But I was taken legitimately into the presence of Jesus and held in his arms, 14-year-old, just shattered kid, and felt loved for the first time in my life. And I came out of that experience. It's a long story. I wrote it in my book, Nobody's Angel. But within a few months, I'd gone to a prayer meeting, legitimate people who loved Jesus during the Jesus movement. And I surrendered it all. And it took about probably a year to get all the rebellious garbage out of my life. But shortly after that, felt like the Lord called me to ministry. Shortly after that, I was in Bible school. And then after that, I was doing different ministries. And then in 1986, I'd always ask the Lord, I said, when is the time to talk about the occult stuff? Because I knew it was real in my life and it was in other people's. And in 86, it seemed like the Lord said, it's go time. And I landed in El Paso in 1987 and was working with a lady named Sue Joyner who she was doing little classes for churches. She was just a housewife that loved God, but doing little classes on, the dangers of the occult and the rock music and all that. And what started out as just something plain and ordinary, in 87, there was a deluge of Satanism and satanic crime. I'm talking about murders and suicides. And it was really literally a bloodbath across the country. And for God opened up a door by their request in law enforcement. They said, we don't know anything about this. You guys are the only ones that seem to know anything. Would you train us? And so we started to go into probation classes, law enforcement, wherever they needed it, and tell them what we knew. And we grew as we knew, and we started to compile information. And that led to still going on, but over 30-year work in trying to do something about occult crimes and human trafficking, especially.
Yeah, and you're one of the experts in this field. I remember I did a pre-interview with you for the film, my first film, Silent Cry: The Darker Side of Trafficking, and then we had scheduling conflicts, and there was it was hard to get people to. Traveling was really difficult back then, so we weren't able to actually get you in the film. But that pre-interview is still out there, and I'm so glad that you have this book, Diary of a Devil Hunter, because there's so much in there. It's over 500 pages, everybody that's watching, but it's easy to read. It's easy to understand. It's I don't know if entertaining is the right word. It's a page turner for sure. The subject matter is really dark, but you'll learn a lot. So to start off, what exactly is Satanism and the occult, and how did it become so sanitized and even normalized in our modern times?
It was a progressive thing. I mean, talk for hours about that it actually all this goes back to the beginning of time when Satan tempted Adam and Eve, and that happened, and then this occult practice of worshiping other gods led up to the Tower of Babel, and then there was Baal and Asherah, and all the other gods and goddesses who required human sacrifice of infants, and then you fast forward into France in the 16th century, 1600s, and you had people like Gilles de Rais and Catherine Deschays, who were dedicated to darkness. They had been trained in the black masses, is what they were called. And what happened, from my understanding, is the Catholic Church, the Pope at the time, had commissioned the Knights Templar to go into Jerusalem to defend it. But then he didn't back them up. And a lot of them turned on him and turned on God. And so it became what was called the Black Mass. Well, they would act like a priest at night, and then they would do the Black Mass by day, and then they do black mass at night down in the basement or wherever, where they would take all the elements of the Christian church and blaspheme them. They would turn the cross upside down, or they would put a goat head in place. They would drink and eat blasphemous materials, and say the Lord's Prayer backwards. All that. Fast forward from there to Aleister Crowley from England in the 40s and 30s, 40s, around that time period, and he started the Ordo Templi Orientis, and then started his own brand of devil worship, if you want to call it that. And he revived all of these ancient rituals and turned them into several books about how to do these rituals. So, and he became notorious. And then you fast forward to 70s, and a little former a police photographer named Anton LaVey hated the church, and so he decided to create his own church, which is known as the Church of Satan. And it was totally, scandalous at the time, but it caught the attention of a lot of people. He wrote the book, The Satanic Bible, which is at the time had been read by more people in that generation than just about any other book, and it caught like wildfire, and it was all anti-Christ, anti-Jesus material. He was not, as far as we know, a criminal. He swore that he wasn't. He didn't do any criminal activities. He was just this kind of sensational. He was like a circus barker. A lot of people didn't take him seriously, but he did get the attention of a lot of people in Hollywood, which is where the sanitization began. And he had a lot of people in Hollywood that joined his church. People like Sammy Davis Jr. That joined it for a while. We got pictures of him with Anton LaVey, and the mother of, I believe, Mariska Hargitay from Law and Order SUV, which was Jane Mansfield, was her mother. And Jane Mansfield was like the first, I think, high priestess of the Church of Satan. She didn't stay long, but it added to the notoriety and then kind of the Hollywoodizing of the occult. But then there were other groups that were starting to operate. You have two levels. You have the level for the consumer, and then you have the real power players in the occult world, which most people are never going to see or know that they're back there, and they mean business. So the sanitization, I think, went from LaVey. We had a guy named Michael Aquino with the Temple of Set that was in the military, so he sort of normalized some of these things for the military, at least made it easier for people to practice in the military. And then at the fast forward now, we're in an era where it's almost either a joke or it's something like the Satanic Temple that just like this is just our right. Satan is just a symbol of rebellion or whatever. And pretty much, everything's tickety boo. It's like, what's the problem with this stuff? Without anybody knowing the real background or the sinister elements that are at work in the name of Satan.
Yeah, and sinister is right. And I know that I know we're on YouTube, so we can't go into too graphic of detail, but can you tell us about some of the crimes that have been committed in the name of Satanism and occultism that you detail in your book?
Well, I think, there was two right up front, because when I first started to do what I did, I didn't know what direction I was being pulled in. And I was contacted by a lady whose nephew had disappeared. And apparently he had been involved in a role-playing game called Dungeons and Dragons. He and his girlfriend got involved, and within a short period of time, they joined this little gang called the Lost Boys, which was based on the whole deal with the movie that came out during that time. And they thought it was still a game. And apparently they thought it was a game when it turned a little more into black magic. And then the drug dealing was going on. And the boy decided he wanted out. And so he moved to Oklahoma for a short period of time, came back and told his girlfriend, come with me, let's get out of this thing. And she asked him apparently to go to one more meeting. And they took the kids out and they disappeared. We searched for them all over. We were on the news all the way through Texas, where any radio show that would have us, to see what happened to them. And unfortunately, I believe that was over the summer. And then the first part of November, they found their bodies out by Lake O.C. Fisher down there. And they had been shotgunned to death and, body parts taken away and different things. It was heartbreaking and the most difficult thing to go to a funeral like that and watch the whole gang showed up with their Lost Boys colors. They were flying their jackets. And I'm like, the police aren't even really looking at these guys. Still a cold case. Still hasn't been solved. And then shortly after that, there was a case in Texas of a young lady who was completely butchered. That's all I'm going to say. And the perpetrator and his companion got away with it. They did it. They left town. They come back into the Midland, Odessa area. They got stopped on some sort of drunk driving charge. They separated them for questioning because they thought something else was going on. And the younger guy said, I didn't do it myself, but I was there when that girl was killed. And they had no idea what he's even talking about. When they finally figured it out, they brought the two together for further questioning. And the younger one told the guy, he said, I told him, and he used a different name for this guy, which is what we knew as a coven name. You have your regular name, then you have the coven name you use, whether it's something like ISIS or it's, whatever, Josh or whatever. And the older one said, you shut your mouth and don't say one more word. And he didn't. And he shut up and they released him, I think. And 2 days later, he went out in the oil field and put his head under a pump jack and extinguished his life. And I believe at the time, and I'm sure I'll get some calls because some of these law enforcement people are still alive, and I still hold their feet to the fire. But apparently one of the people responsible for the prosecution said, just get this guy out of town on any charge you can. I'm not dealing with this Satanism stuff. So the guy went out of town and he got away with it. That was tip of the iceberg. That was just two crimes that we've faced up front. And, it seemed like every week or every month there was some sort of murder or suicide that was coming up in the news.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask too, is how common are these crimes in America? Would you say that they're a lot more common than most people realize?
I think they are. And I think it hits a different level because back then, I think that the crimes and what it created was a deliberate incitement by the people who were in charge because they believed that chaos and confusion is where they get their power from. And for them to stir the pot, and they believe that they get power from these horrible crimes. So it was to their advantage, so to speak, to recruit the kids in, set them on fire, have them do these horrible things because they believe they were getting the power from it. So I think it was more open in some ways back in the 80s, may have been more prevalent. We really haven't got a handle on that yet, but it was definitely something that was extraordinary. And then in the 90s, it started to die out. I don't believe the crimes necessarily died out. I think they just decided to put a lid on the reporting of these things. And it was like the pendulum swing. All of a sudden, it's, Geraldo's issue du jour and something that's really sensational. And then all of a sudden, there came this huge backlash that tried to prove that none of this stuff was real. And that was extraordinarily, breathtakingly successful, because they managed to take our network from about 250 people across the country down to about 5 before they were over. And I think that's what happened. So the crimes still happen, but law enforcement, even to this day, is extraordinarily reluctant to call it what it is. And now we have a new kind of evil that's come up through Mexico with the Santa Muerte and the cartels, that they have their own brand of dark sacrificial rites. And a lot of the people on the police on the border, they're not sure what to do with all this because it's really brutal stuff. So, still very much happening. Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, how there was a time that where this was kind of looked at as fake, and most people, when they hear satanic panic, they think it was all blown out of proportion, or that there wasn't anything going on. What's the truth behind what's now called the satanic panic?
The truth behind the satanic panic, I believe, was a very well orchestrated series of reporting, and they had people in the Christian community that started to write articles that said this stuff is not real. We had people in law enforcement, particularly at high levels of the government, who said they've never seen any evidence of this, and it's all just people trying to get attention. And then we had people from the psychological community started a group called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation that were hired in nearly every court case I knew to prove to the public and to the courts that children were lying about being abused. It was, from my standpoint, it was extremely coordinated. It almost had to be. And so it all came in around the same time, and it really stunned us because we were making incredible progress. We had trained the Killeen Police Academy in Killeen, Texas, 3 or 4 times, I think, where we had legitimate training on what to look for, crime scenes, boots on the ground type of stuff. And then the one year they had a teacher come in that was law enforcement, apparently, that had everybody do a live crime scene that was occult related. And then he came back to the class and said, "You did a good job, guys, but you need to know you're hardly ever going to run across this because this stuff doesn't really happen." Mm-hmm. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And so I realized we were being nibbled at from all sides. And the only thing I can say is people need to look at the other side. It's so easy because people don't want to believe this happens. And I don't blame them. Who wants to believe these horrors are happening? But those of us who have been, in the zero, we don't have that option. That's why I'm thankful, as horrible as it has been, this discovery of the human trafficking, that there are people that are law enforcement and others that have seen it personally in every level and say this stuff is absolutely 100% real. Even the most horrid details are stuff that we knew was going on in the 80s. The public was told none of it was real. And now we got people that have the evidence saying, yeah, all of this is real. So it's been quite and that's why a lot of what I documented in the book was, the book's kind of a combination of things. It is autobiographical, of course, in some ways, but it's a documentary in other ways. And it's my way of saying, I don't have all of the picture, but here is a 20-year picture of all the real stuff that we dealt with that was boots on the ground. You can't tell me it didn't happen because, as my friend Dr. Mike Spalding said, we have the receipts.
Yeah, definitely. And I came across a bit of this pushback too when I did Silent Cry, because I was trying to get on like conservative podcasts and stuff to talk about this stuff, and I couldn't get on hardly any of them. The only organization that actually did anything for me to try to help was Turning Point USA. I actually have a page with them still. Like I'm like, I haven't done a speaking event, but I'm on there. Like I could be called to do one at any time. But I noticed that too, that this pushback of even conservative podcasts that I watch and respect and I know personally, people like friends of mine even. I'm not going to name any names, but I remember I was really surprised. I got one message back from somebody who I had interviewed before and who's very popular, has a very big podcast, and it could have really helped get the word out. And this person said, I'm going to pass on this. This just sounds a little bit too much like all that QAnon stuff and all these conspiracy theory stuff. And, I don't know. And the thing is, when you watch Silent Cry, we don't get into any of that. We right. Get into, we just get into the actual like stuff you're talking about, documented things that actually happened, like the whole Finders case. We opened the movie with that, and this is all documented stuff. But and in all honesty, it made me kind of lose a lot of respect for these people, because it's like, to me, I felt like because you don't want to be potentially embarrassed a little bit, now other children potentially have to suffer. Because there's not as much of a light on this. What do you think is the motivation behind people, law enforcement, organizations, whatever, trying to push that this is all fake? Is it just because it's easier for them, or maybe some law enforcement or whoever, are they complicit in some of this stuff? What are your thoughts?
I think probably all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
We were involved in several cases where we knew for a fact that there were policemen on the inside that were covering up.
Mm.
There's, I'm totally back to blue myself.
Mm-hmm.
So my father was a cop.
Yeah.
But we have had infiltration. It's easier to understand how this works. I think if you put it in the framework of mafia
mm-hmm.
operations, there's a certain way they do things. There's a certain way they pay people off. There's a certain way they make things disappear. And we had all of that at some point. But there's a swath of people who are like, they're good people, and people that are my friends, but they've got this kind of, people don't really believe this stuff. And I'm like, when you see it, you have to believe it. And I unfortunately, myself and some others, we don't have that option. Mm-hmm. So you either can say none of it was real, but you'll have to look me in the face and tell me that I'm lying, or that I didn't see what I saw. And I think part of it, Josh, is cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
You look at this horrible thing and you're like, I didn't see that, or I don't want to see that. I've had many friends say, I'd start talking about this. So we'd really rather not talk about that because, well, let's face it, most of us live in a happy bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to hear this. So it's easier to find a reason to dismiss it. And if somebody comes along and says, I know everything you heard was horrible, but good news, none of it was real. It's like, I'll take door number one,
Yeah, it makes sense, especially, having kids myself. I have 5 kids, and at the time, Silent Cry, let's see, that was around COVID, because that was when all the travel restrictions we I think we only got like maybe 5 or 6 people in that movie, but at the time, I might have had 2 or 3. I don't remember exactly, but I had kids, and it's like I can't ignore it. Like I can't, because to me, if I feel like if I ignore it, don't talk about it, don't at least acknowledge it, I'm basically complicit. And then if I'm not shining a light, other kids, might have to suffer because of that. And I feel like if just everybody would look at it that way, and like, I know it's dark and it's horrible, and like nobody really wants to even accept that we live in a world where this stuff happens. But unfortunately, people out there, America is like the worst country for child trafficking. It's awful. And it's because so many people don't want to touch it. It's because there's not a huge public outcry. And when there is even a small one, it's looked at as a conspiracy theory, and people that, they end up working against it. And it's insane. So I really commend people like you that and those out there that watch my shows and actually engage and try to get the word out there. I really appreciate the work that you do in this area. Something else that you talk about in the book, which I was kind of surprised by. You talk about Nazi occultism and how it's actually taken roots in certain places in America. Can you tell us about what these people believe and how dangerous they are?
Well, of course, it started out with Hitler, who, everybody knew he was a maniac. Some people
Yeah.
would admit that he was possessed, but he was also very well trained by the most powerful occultists in the East, in Europe at that point. They were the ones that he thought was going to usher in the new age of mankind as a Luciferian worldwide system. And he was all in in the Velvesberg Castle in Germany. It was a place where regularly the SS would go and they would do literal satanic rituals, decapitate a soldier, and call up whatever they were calling up. All that's documented. There's no fantasy about that.
Yep.
So there's been a lot of surviving groups, and a lot of that's come through, and that's where it gets real tricky. When we did, or when the government did Operation Paperclip, which everybody thought was a fantasy or conspiracy theory until it wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
they brought in, over 100 Nazi scientists, occultists, experimenters, everybody. I believe Josef Mengele, the angel of death, was one of those, and continue to have them work for our intelligence communities and our science communities, exonerated them from whatever, but put them back to work doing exactly the same criminal stuff. They brought that occultism with them, and there are several groups that were established during that time that were practicing. There was one in Phoenix called the Black Order of the Fourth Reich,
Mm-hmm.
and they were dedicated to, anti-Semitic, kill Jews, whatever. But they were also very, very deep in the occult as part of their practices. So that goes on, and it goes on in a lot of, smaller communities where there's more of an Aryan type flair, where there's kind of almost a hidden anti-Semitism or whatever, anti-Black in the community. I've seen some of those groups established in those places.
Yeah.
But that's where it got tricky for us, because once we made a single link to, in ritual abuse, what was called mind control.
Mm-hmm.
And this is back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I really had to just go as far as I could and discover the truth. And I read a couple of books that were absolutely mind-blowing and enlightening as to the whole process of our government spending multi-millions of dollars to hire a doctor in Canada, and gave him carte blanche to bring people into his clinic and lock them in the basement for years and experiment on mind control.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is back in the 80s. Like I said, when everybody's like, this can't be possible. But we were getting the victims, people who grew up in Satanism, and they were talking about being programmed, and they had, codes that they gave us, and we're watching all this. It seemed like almost science fiction to us until we realized that it wasn't. And a couple of the big cases broke with pedophilia out of Nebraska that helped us to see this thing was extensive in those groups, that they were literally creating people, as Russ Dizdar would say, the super soldiers, the dark awakening, that people were being messed with in that way. And again, I know people have a hard time understanding it, but what a surprise, and kind of a too late maybe for us to realize all the things we're talking about. We were told about MKUltra. We knew that name before anybody knew what we're talking about. When they were talking about the butterfly program, the monarch program, and it seemed like fantasy to people. And now you can go on the internet and you can find the actual documents from the government saying, yeah, that was us. We did those programs.
Yeah, it's insane that this stuff is publicly available, and still a lot of people don't want to accept it. I've got a lot more that I want to ask you. I want to ask you about how some of these people have infiltrated churches and ministries, about your own personal attacks and stuff like that. But before we do, where can people pick up your book, and where can people follow you online if they want to learn more?
Okay, book, you can get it at Amazon, Diary of a Devil Hunter, Gregory Reid. That's the best place to pick it up. In terms of contacting me, I've got the mailing address is Youth Fire Ministries, and it's box 37006, El Paso, Texas 79937. But I also have a podcast where we're covering a lot of this, which is called Extreme Times: Truth in the Shadowlands, and that's where it's become a new avenue to start to put out. Right now, we're going through a whole book that I did on spiritual warfare called War of the Ages, where I'm reading in a chapter at a time, and people can essentially get the book by listening to the podcast. So that's what the basic contact. But I think with the where things are, the Extreme Times Truth in the Shadowlands podcast is, I think, an important outlet at this point for us.
Excellent. And then, yeah, please let us know when that new book is out. We'll have to have you back on for that as well.
It's actually already out.
Oh, it is? Okay, great. Well, we'll set something up. Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the first half of this episode of The Sharpening Report. You know, if you are a Bible-believing Christian who opposes the kingdom of darkness trying to run the world right now, then you are a renegade to the Satanic system. We here at Daily Renegade wear that badge proudly. So, if you're a renegade as well and you want to see the rest of this video, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now and get a membership today. Not only will you get the rest of this video, but you'll get our full catalog of Sharpening Report episodes and Daily Renegade update videos on topics such as Bible prophecy, science, technology, the Nephilim, aliens, and so much more. All of our episodes at Daily Renegade are early access, so as a member, you'll get the videos before anyone else does. Daily Renegade also offers videos not available anywhere else due to social media censorship. We also have a community page only for members where we can all fellowship together without fear of censorship. It's basically the best of Facebook and YouTube rolled into one without any of the garbage. Memberships are only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can do it, I suggest getting the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run, and essentially you get 2 months for free that way. So come join our family of renegades at dailyrenegade.com right now. The link is in the description below, and we'll see you there.